Welcome to Miss Retro Reads, continuation of Beau Geste. Chapter 3 Beau Geste and His Band. I think that if very small Geste were allowed to live, he might retrieve his character and find a hero's grave, said the lieutenant. And what would he do if he found a hero's grave? Inquired the captain. Pinch the flowers and sell them, I suppose. As for retrieving his character, it is better left where it is, if it is not near water, used for drinking purposes. Oh, please let him live, interrupted Faithful Hound. He is very useful, if only to try things on. I was grateful to Faithful Hound for erring to intercede for me, but felt she was rating my usefulness somewhat low. Well, we'll try bread and water on him then, said Captain after a pause. We'll also try a flogging, he added, on seeing my face brighten, and the name of Feeble Geste, remove it. Ghastly Gustus and Queen Claudia, that the law might take its course. It took it, while Faithful Hound wept and Claudia watched with interest. I used to dislike the bread and water even more than the six of the best, which was the flogging administered, more in sorrow than in anger by the captain himself. The opprobrious name only lasted a day, but it was perhaps the worst punishment of all. It kept one in the state of unblessedness, disgraced and outcast. This was part of the law, as laid down by the captain, and beneath his law was lived, desiring his praise and rewards more than we feared his blame and punishment. The captain was my brother, Michael Geste, later and generally known as Beau Geste, by reason of his beauty, brilliance, and general distinction. He was a person of irresistible charm, and his charm was enhanced by the fact that he was as energetic as he was forceful. He was incurably romantic, but of a bulldog tenacity. If he suddenly did some ridiculously romantic thing, he did it thoroughly and completely, and he stuck to it until it was done. Aunt Patricia, whose favorite he was, said that he combined the reckless courage of a youthful d'Artagnan with the staunch tenacity of a wise old Scotsman. Little wonder that he exercised an extraordinary fascination over those who lived with him. The lieutenant, my brother Digby, was his twin, a quarter of an hour his junior, and his worshipping shadow. Digby had all Michael's qualities, but to a less marked degree. He was easier both upon himself and other people. He loved fun and laughter, but above all, loved doing what Michael did. I was a year younger than the twins. At school we were known as Geste, Small Geste, and Very Small Geste, and I was indeed very small, in all things compared with my brothers, to please whom was my chief aim in life. Probably I transferred to them the affections that would have been given to my parents, but we were orphans, and lived our lives between school and Brandon Abbas. Our aunt, Lady Brandon, did more than her duty by us, but certainly concealed her love, except towards Michael. Childless herself, all her maternal love was given to him and Claudia, an extraordinarily beautiful girl whose origin was, so far as we were concerned, mysterious, but who was vaguely referred to as a cousin. She and Isobel Rivers, a niece of Aunt Patricia, spent a good deal of their childhood at Brandon Abbas, Isobel being, I think, imported as a companion for Claudia when we were at school. She proved excellent companion for us also, and soon earned the honorable title of Faithful Hound. Augustus Brandon, nephew of Sir Hector, often came during holidays in spite of the discouragement of the namely ghastly Gustus, and our undisguised disapproval. One could not love Augustus. He was too like Uncle Hector. Also, he was too disposed to presume upon his being the heir. However, Michael dealt with him faithfully, neither sparing the rod nor spoiling the child. I do not remember the precise crime that had led to my trial, but I recollect the incident for two reasons. One is that on this same day I achieved the permanent title of stout fella, when inverting the usual order. Pride came after the fall. The other was that on that evening we had the privilege of seeing the blue water, the great sapphire which Uncle Hector had given Aunt Patricia as a wedding gift. I believe his great-grandfather had acquired it when soldiering in India. This sapphire was the loveliest, most fascinating thing I have ever seen. I could look at it for hours. It always gave me a curious longing to put it in my mouth, or hold it to my nose like a flower. For so beautiful an object seemed to demand the exercise of all five senses. When I first heard the charitable remark, Sir Hector Brandon bought Patricia Rivers with the blue water, and now owns the pair, I felt that both statements were true. After all, possession of the blue water must have been Aunt Patricia's only reason for marrying a man like Uncle Hector. Yet the fact remained that the stone was still owned by Uncle Hector. Aunt Patricia, having married him, was forbidden even to wear it. She could only look at it occasionally like anybody else. My degree of S.F., stout fella, I earned in this wise. One of Michael's favorite pastimes was naval engagements. Two stately ships with sails set and rudders fixed were simultaneously shoved forth from the edge of the lily pond by the captain and the lieutenant. They were crowded with lead soldiers, and each bore a battery of 3 brass cannon. To each loaded cannon was attached a fuse. The fuses were lighted as the ships were launched from their harbors. The captain presided over the ship and flew the Union Jack, and the lieutenant over the one that carried the tricolor of France. There was a glorious uncertainty of result. Each ship might receive a broadside from the other. One alone might suffer, or both might blaze ineffectually into the blue. After the broadside had been exchanged, we all sat and gloated as the ships glided on, wreathed in battle smoke, perhaps with riddled sails and splintered hulls. I was then privileged to wade out, like Gulliver at Lilliput, and bring the ships to harbor, where their guns were reloaded and the voyage repeated. On this great day, the first combat was ideal. The ships converged, the guns fired, splinters flew, soldiers fell, and the ships remained locked in a death grapple. "Fetch 'em in, feeble jest," said Michael, and tucking up my trousers, I waded in and sent the ships back to port. The next round was more one-sided, for only one of the French ships' guns fired. The big gun amidships and the stern chaser swivel gun were improperly fused. I waded in again, turned the French ship, and with a mighty bang, her big gun went off, and I took the charge in my leg. Luckily, it was a single buckshot, but as I emerged from the pond, blood oozed from a neat blue hole, and faithful hound uttered a dog-like howl of horror. Claudia asked to be informed exactly how it felt. "Just like being shot," I replied. "I'm going to be sick." "Do it in the pond, then," requested the captain, producing his pocket-knife and a box of matches. "Now," he continued, holding the blade in the flame, "will you be gagged or chew on a bullet? I don't want my surgery disturbed by your beastly yells." "I shall not yell, Captain," I replied with dignity. "Sit on his head, Dig," said Michael to the lieutenant, but waving Digby away, I turned on my side and offered my limb. "Hold his hoof, then," ordered the captain. It was painful beyond words, but I bit my knuckles and refrained from kicking by realizing it was impossible with Digby sitting on my leg and Claudia standing on my foot. After what seemed a long time, I heard Michael say, "Here it comes," and then a cheer from the band announced the recovery of the buckshot. "Shove it back in the gun, Dig," said the captain. "Isabel, sneak up to the bathroom and bring me the scratch muck." The faithful hound, mopping her tear bedewed face, sped away and soon returned with the scratch muck, the bottle of antiseptic lotion, patch of boric lint, and a roll of bandage. Michael made a really excellent job of dressing the wound. Then he raised me to the seventh heaven by solemnly conferring upon me, in perpetuity, the title of Stout Fella. In that I had shed no tears and uttered no sounds. Further, he awarded me the single honor of a full-dressed Viking's funeral. A Viking's funeral cannot be solemnized every day, for it involves, among other things, the destruction of a longship. The dead Viking is laid upon a pyre in the center of his ship, his spear and shield beside him. His dog is slaughtered, and its body placed in attendance. Then the pyre is lighted, and the ship sent out with all sails set. On this occasion the offending French ship was used. A specially selected lead soldier, after being endowed with the name of the Viking Earl, Beau Geste, was laid upon a matchbox full of explosives, with a small china dog at his feet. Then the ship was drenched in paraffin. We bared our heads. Michael solemnly uttered the beautiful word, "Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. If God won't have you, the devil must," and applying a match, shoved the ship out into the middle of the pond. The leaping flames consumed the mast and sail, and we stood silent, envisaging the horrors of a burnt ship at sea. As the vessel burned down to the water's edge, then disappeared in a hiss, Michael broke silence with the words that Digby and I were to remember many years later. "That's what I call a funeral," he said. "Compare that with being stuck 10 feet down in a beastly cemetery." "I'd give something to have one like that when my turn comes." "Right-o, Beau," said Digby. "I'll give you one, old chap." "So will I you, Dig, if you die first," replied Michael to his twin, and they solemnly shook hands upon it. That evening we were variously employed in the schoolroom when Burden, the butler, came and told us that we could go into the drawing-room. Claudia and Isabel were there, and the former talking in a very grown-up way to a jolly-looking foreign person to whom we were presented. We were thrilled to discover that he was a French cavalry officer on leave from Morocco, where he had been fighting. "We must get him up to the camp tomorrow," whispered Michael, as we gathered round a glass dome, under which, on a white velvet cushion, lay the blue water sapphire. We looked at it in silence, and I distinctly had the feeling it would not be good to stare too long at that wonderful concentration of color. It seemed alive, a little sinister. "May we handle it, Aunt Patricia?" asked Claudia, and as usual she got her way. Aunt Patricia lifted off the glass and handed the jewel to the Frenchman, who gave it to Claudia. "That has caused we know not what of strife and bloodshed," he said. "What a tale it could tell." "Can you tell tales of strife and bloodshed, please?" asked Michael, as soon as we were all begging him to tell us about his fighting. He ranked second only to the blue water as a center of attraction. The following afternoon after lunch Claudia exercised her fascinations upon the stranger and brought him to our camp in the Bower, a clearing in the woods near the house. Here he sat on a log and thrilled us with tales of the Spahis and the French Foreign Legion. He told us of desert warfare and of Arab cruelties, of hand-to-hand combat, veiled tuaregs, mirages, sandstorms, and the wonders of Africa. He showed us fencing tricks and feats of swordsmanship, until, when he left us after shaking our hands and kissing Claudia, we were his body and soul. "I'm going to join the French Foreign Legion when I leave Eton," announced Michael suddenly. "Get a commission, and then join his regiment." "So am I," said Digby. "Of course," and I agreed. Next day we went back to school. As our school days went by, my heart ached more and more for Aunt Patricia. Poor woman, she had contracted an alliance with Sir Hector Brandon, as one might contract a disease. The one alleviation was the affliction's intermittence. For this moment of selfishness was generally anywhere but home, for he, being a mighty hunter and usually in pursuit of prey, bipped or quadruped in distant places. It is a good thing to have an aim in life. Sir Hector's was to kill one of every species of beast in the world. As children, we did not realize, of course, what Aunt Patricia suffered at the hands of this man, but as we grew older, it was impossible to avoid knowing that he was universally hated, and that he bled the estate shamelessly in order to enjoy himself abroad. Children might die of diphtheria because of faulty drains, or old people of chills because of leaking roofs, but Sir Hector's yacht and Sir Hector's friends would lack for nothing, and Lady Brandon had to remain at home to face the music, whether growls of wrath or cries of pain. But we boys and girls were exceedingly fortunate, a happy band who followed our leader Michael, carefree and joyous. The feat of Michael's that impressed us most was his sustaining the role of a man in armor for what seemed an appallingly long time. It was nearly long enough to cause my death. One wet afternoon, we had the brilliant idea of dressing up in one of the suits of armor in the outer hall. Nothing loath we, his henchmen, with much ingenuity and more string, caused the knight in his armor. He was just striking an attitude and bidding a caitiff to die when the sound of a motor horn intruded, and the band dispersed like rabbits. Michael stepped up on the pedestal and stood at ease. Digby fled up the stairs, and the girls dashed into the drawing-room. Augustus rushed down the corridor, and I dived into an old chest in the hall. There I lay, as though screwed down in a coffin. Pride forbade me to crawl forth. I was suffering horribly, and the next thing I knew I was laying on my bed, and Michael was smiting my face with a wet sponge, while Digby dealt kindly blows upon my chest and stomach. When sufficiently recovered and rebuked for being such a lame brain, I was informed that Aunt Patricia had driven up with a man, mystery of mysteries, and had confabulated with him right in front of the man in armor. Afterwards, speeding, the man went away again in his car. We were much intrigued, for Michael would not say a word beyond that such a person had come and had gone, and that he himself had remained so still that not a creak or a clink had betrayed him in the suit of armor. In the universal admiration for this feat, my own poor performance in preferring death to discovery passed unpraised, until Digby, who was an expert burglar, took down his old coach horn from the wall and blew what he said was a horrific fanfare of heralds' trumpets, in recognition of our joint tenacity. In spite of Michael's reticence, we others discussed the visit of the man in all its bearings. Arriving at no conclusion, however, we were driven to the theory that the strange visitor was in some way connected with a young Maharaja who had been at Eton. We remembered him as having been a splendid athlete, very devoted to Michael, but at the same time as a rather strange sort of fellow. Aunt Patricia had once welcomed him to Brandon Abbas at Michael's request, and when he saw the blue water he actually and literally fainted. I suppose the sight of the sapphire was the occasion rather than the cause, but it was uncanny beyond words, the more so since he never uttered the sound, and neither then nor afterwards said one syllable on the subject of the great jewel. And so we lived our happy lives at Brandon Abbas, when not at prep school, at Eton, or later at Oxford. Then one fine autumn evening, life suddenly and unexpectedly changed. The act of one person altered the lives of all of us, and brought suffering, exile, and death in its train. On this evening so ordinary yet so fateful, we sat after dinner in the drawing-room of Brandon Abbas. Present were Aunt Patricia, Claudia, Isabel, Michael, Digby, Augustus, Brandon, and myself. Aunt Patricia asked Claudia to sing, but she excused herself on the score of being out of sorts and not feeling like it. She certainly looked pale and somewhat below her usual sparkling standard. For some days she had seemed preoccupied and worried, and I wondered if her bridge debts and dressmaker's bills were the cause. With her wonted desire to be helpful, Isabel went to the piano, and for some time we listened while my aunt knitted. Claudia frowned. Augustus tapped his cigarette case with a cigarette he dared not light, and Digby turned the leaves of a magazine, and Michael watched Claudia. Presently Isabel rose from the piano, and Claudia said, "Oh, Aunt, do let's have the blue water down for a little while. I haven't seen it for ages." "Rather," agreed Michael, and Aunt Patricia said she would get it. Only she and Uncle Hector knew the secret of opening the priest's hole, and I believe it would have taken an extraordinary burglar to have discovered it. Michael, Digby, and I had spent countless hours, with the consent of our aunt, trying to find the trick, but without success. Aunt Patricia disappeared for a time, and then returned carrying the sapphire on its cushion under the dome. She placed it on a table beneath the chandelier, with its countless cut glass pendants and circle of electric bulbs, and there it lay, its glowing blue fascinating us as we gazed upon it. "What is the blue water worth, Aunt Patricia?" asked Claudia. "To whom, dear?" was the reply. "If somebody were anxious to buy it, I suppose he'd try to find out the lowest sum that would be considered. Supposing you were going to sell it, what would you ask?" "I certainly am not going to sell it," Aunt Patricia, in a voice that should have closed the conversation, said. She had that day received a letter from her husband announcing his early return from India, and it had not cheered her at all. "I heard someone say that Uncle Hector was offered £30,000 for it," said Augustus. "Did you?" replied Aunt Patricia. "Oh, let me kiss it," said Claudia. Aunt Patricia, raising the dome, picked up the sapphire and examined it as though she had never handled it before. She looked through it at the light. She then passed it to Claudia, held it a while. We all took it in turn, Augustus throwing it up and catching it, as he murmured, £30,000 for a bit of glass. When Michael got it, I thought he was never going to pass it on. He weighed and rubbed and examined it more in the manner of a dealer than an admirer of beauty. Finally Aunt Patricia put it back on its cushion and replaced the cover. Michael began to talk about India, Rajahs, and their marvelous historical jewels, and I was just bending over the table, peering into the depths of the sapphire, when suddenly, as occasionally happens, the lights failed, and we were plunged into darkness. "What's Ferguson up to now?" said Digby, alluding to the chauffeur who was responsible for the generator. "It'll come on again in a minute," said Aunt Patricia. "Don't wander about anybody and knock things over." Somebody brushed lightly against me as I stood by the table. "Ghosts and goblins," said Isabel. "Who's got a match? A skeleton hand is about to clutch my throat. I can't see." "Everybody," I remarked as the light came on again. We blinked at each other in the dazzling glare. "Saved," said Isabel with an exaggerated sigh of relief, and then as I looked at her, she stared open-mouthed, pointing. The white velvet cushion beneath the glass cover was bare. The blue water had vanished. Aunt Patricia broke the silence. "Your joke, Augustus?" she inquired in a tone that would have made an elephant feel small. "Me? No, Aunt, I swear. I never touched it." "Well, there's someone with a sense of humor all his own," she observed, and I was glad that I was not the misguided humorist. You were standing by the table, John, she continued. Are you the jester? No, aunt, I replied with feeble wit. Only the guest. Digby and Michael both pleaded innocent, and so did the girls. Lady Brandon eyed the six of us severely. Let us agree that the brilliant joke has been carried far enough, shall we? She said. Put the brilliant joke back, John, said Augustus. You were the only one near it when the lights went out. Suppose you put it back, said Digby, and his voice had an edge on it. I haven't got the beastly thing, shouted Augustus, ferociously. It's one of the three rotters. The situation was rapidly becoming unpleasant. My aunt's lips were growing thinner, and her eyebrows beginning to contract toward her high-bridged nose. Look here, sillies, said Isabel. I'm going to turn the lights out again for 2 minutes. Whoever played the trick is to put the blue water back. Then no one will know who did it. And she walked to the door and flicked the light switch. Everybody keep still except the villain, she said. It occurred to me that it would be interesting to know who had played this joke and told a lie. Therefore, stepped toward the table and laid my hand on top of the glass dome. Whoever came to return the sapphire must touch me, and him I would seize. Perfect silence reigned in the big room. I can't do it. My boots creak, said Digby suddenly. I can't find the cover, said Michael. Another minute, villain, said Isabel. Hurry up. Then I was conscious of someone's breathing, and I felt a faint touch on my elbow. A hand came down against my wrist, and I grabbed. My left hand was round a coat sleeve, and my right grasped a wrist. I was glad it was a man's arm. Ghastly Gustus, of course. It was just the sort of thing he would do. But I was surprised that he did not struggle. He kept perfectly still. I am going to count 10, and then up goes the light, came the voice of Isabel from the door. It's all right. I've put it back, said Digby. So have I, said Michael, close to me. And I, echoed Claudia. Isabel switched on the light, and I found that my hands were clinching the right arm of Michael. I was more surprised than I can say. It was as unlike him to do it as if it were to flatly deny having done it, and my surprise increased when Michael, looking at me oddly, remarked, So it was me, John, was it? Ah, feeble jest. I felt absurdly hurt, and turning to Augustus said, I apologize, Gussie. I admit I thought it was you. Oh, don't add insult to injury, he replied. Just put the beastly thing back and stop being funny. I turned and looked at the cushion. It was still empty. Oh, shove it back, Beau, I said. Michael gave me one of his penetrating looks. Put it back, Beau, and let's have a dance, said Isabel. May we, Aunt? Certainly, said Aunt Patricia, as soon as the humorist in our midst has received our felicitations. We all stood silent. Now stop this fooling, said Lady Brandon. Unless the blue water is produced at once, I shall be very seriously annoyed. And her foot began to tap. I shall not forget the succeeding hour in a hurry. 6 people suspecting one or the other 6, and the 7th person pretending to do so. My aunt quickly brought things to a clear issue. She walked to a Chesterfield that stood in the big window recess, and there seated herself with the air of a queen on a throne. Nobody spoke. Since the fool won't leave his folly, began my aunt. Come here, Claudia. Did you take the blue water? She laid her hand on Claudia's arm, drew her close, and looked into her eyes. No, aunt, she said. Then again, no, aunt. Of course not, said Aunt Patricia. Go to bed, dear. And Claudia departed, not without an indignant glance at me. Come here, Isabel, continued my aunt. Have you touched the blue water since I put it back in its place? No, aunt, I have not. I'm sure you have not. Go to bed, and good night. Isabel turned and then stopped. But I might have, if the idea had occurred to me. It's just a joke, of course. Bed. Isabel departed with a kind glance at me. Aunt Patricia turned to Augustus. "Come here," she said, staring into his shifty eyes. "If you have got the blue water, and give it to me now, I shall not say another word about the matter. Have you?" "I swear, Aunt." "You need not swear. Nor to me, Augustus. Yes or no?" "No, Aunt." "John," said my aunt, "do you know where the stone is?" "No, Aunt," I replied, and added, "Nor have I touched it since you did." She favored me with a long look, which I was able to meet calmly. I hope not rudely. As I looked away, my eyes met Michael's. He was watching me oddly. Then came Digby's turn. He said quite simply that he knew nothing about the jewel's disappearance, so that left Michael. He was the culprit, or else one of us had told a lie. "Michael," said Aunt Patricia very gravely and sadly, "I'm sorry. More so than I can tell you. Please put the blue water back, and I will say no more. But I doubt whether I shall feel like calling you Beau for some time." "I can't put it back, Aunt, for I haven't got it," said Michael quietly, and my heart bounded. "Do you know where it is?" "I do not, Aunt." "Have you touched the sapphire since I did?" "I have not, Aunt." "Do you know anything about its disappearance?" "I only know that I have had nothing to do with its disappearance," answered my brother. My aunt stared at Michael, and then said, "This is inexpressibly disgusting. One of you is a despicable liar and apparently a common thief. I am still unable to think the latter, so I shall leave the cover where it is and lock all the doors of this room at midnight. I shall keep the key, except the key of that door there. That one I shall put on the brass box above the fireplace in the outer hall. The servants will have gone to bed and know nothing of its whereabouts. I ask the liar to return the sapphire during the night, relocking the door and replacing the key in the brass box. If this is not done by the time I come down tomorrow, I shall have to conclude that the liar is also a thief, and act accordingly. For form's sake, I shall tell Claudia and Isabel, and then she rose and swept from the room without a good night to any of us. I think we each heaved a sigh of relief, and the door shut behind her. But now what? Digby turned upon Augustus. "Oh, you unutterable cheese," he said, apparently more in sorrow than in anger. "I think debagging is indicated." Augustus glared from one to the other of us like a trapped rat. "You lying swine," he shouted. "Who was by the table when the light came on again? Who was grabbing who?" I looked at Michael and Michael at me. Augustus had never defied either of my brothers before. I expected to see him suffer promptly, but Michael did the unexpected as usual. "Why, I believe the little man's innocent after all," he said. "You know I am." "You hypocrite!" shouted Augustus. Digby's hand closed on the scruff of the boy's neck. "If I've accused you wrongly, Gussie, I'll make it up to you. But if we find you did do it, oh, my little Gussie." "And if you find it was Michael, John, or yourself," sneered the disheveled and shaking Augustus. Michael looked hard at me, and I at him. "Look here," said Digby. "Presumably the thing is in the room. Aunt wouldn't pinch her own jewel, and no one supposed one of the girls did it. That leaves us 4. Find it, Gussie, and I'll swear that I put it there." Digby began throwing cushions from sofas, moving footstools, and generally hunting about, while he encouraged himself and presumably Augustus with cries of "Good dog," "Sick 'em, pup," and joyful barks. We searched minutely, but it was clear that the blue water was not in the room, unless far more skillfully concealed than would have been possible in those few minutes of darkness. "Well, that's that," said Digby at last. "Better tidy up a bit before we go," suggested Michael. "Servants'll smell a rat if it's like this tomorrow." We 3 straightened the room, while Augustus sullenly watched us. "Come to the smoking room, you 2, said Digby to Michael and me. when we had finished. "Yes, go fix it up, cads," urged Augustus. "For 2 cents I'd sit in the hall all night and see who comes for the key." "Either that lad's innocent, or he's really an accomplished young actor," I observed, looking after the retreating Augustus, as we crossed the hall and made our way to the smoking room. Once there, we threw ourselves into deep leather armchairs and produced pipes. "Well, my sons, what about it?" said Michael, poking up the fire. "Pretty go, if the thing isn't there in the morning," said Digby. "I wonder if she'd send Scotland Yard." "Fancy a fat mystery merchant prowling about here and questioning everybody," said Michael. "A bit rough on Aunt, too, apart from the 30,000 pounds, said I. "Reconstruct the dreadful crime," suggested Digby. "Wash out Aunt and the girls." "And Gussie," said Michael. "Nothing but injured innocence would have given him the pluck to call us hypocrites." "You're right, Beau," agreed Digby. "'Sides, young Gus hasn't the guts to pinch anything valuable." "Well, that leaves us 3, said I. "You can count me out, old son," grinned Digby. "Search me." "Then that leaves you and me, John," said Michael. "Yes, it leaves me and you." Again we stared at each other. "I did not take the blue water, Beau." "Nor did I, John." "Then there's a Miss Deal somewhere," remarked Digby, rising. "Anyhow, it'll be put back tonight, and I've had enough today." He chuckled. "I say, what a lark to pinch the key and hide it." "Don't be a fool," said Michael. "Let's go to bed." And we went with our usual curt good nights. But it was easier for me to go to bed than to go to sleep. I tossed and turned, eliminating the others. There remained only Michael and me. How could it be Michael? Had I done it myself? Such was my mental condition by this time that I actually entertained the idea. In fact, I got up and searched my clothes, but of course I found nothing. Hour after hour of reiterated arguments brought me nearer to the conclusion that either Augustus or Michael was the culprit. Having arrived at this point, I delivered myself of the unhelpful verdict: "I believe Augustus isn't, and Michael couldn't be." I went back to bed and made another resolute effort to go to sleep, a foolish thing to do, and as it is one of the best ways of ensuring wakefulness. Eventually, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I decided to reassure myself that the blue water had been put back. I got out of bed, put on my robe and slippers, lit a candle, and made my way down the stairs, through the central hall and into the outer hall, avoiding the protruding sword hilt of the figure in armor. I went up the big stone fireplace. On the mantel was the ancient brass box on which my aunt had placed the key. Only she hadn't, or someone had, removed it, for the box was empty. Was this a trick of my aunt's to catch the guilty one? If so, presumably I was caught. I was reminded of the occasion many years before when she had entered the schoolroom and said, "The naughty child that has been in the still room has got jam on his chin," and my foolish hand promptly went to my face to see if, by some mischance, it were jammy. Well, the best thing to do now was to fade ere the trap closed. I turned, wondering whether Aunt Patricia were watching, and re-entered the central hall. At that moment I saw someone coming towards me. He or she carried no light, and could identify me, the candle being in front of my face. "Well, Gussie?" said I. "Cold morning?" "Well, John, looking for the key?" said Michael's voice. "It's not there, Beau," I answered. "No, John," said he quietly. "It's here." And he held it out towards me. "Beau!" "John?" he mocked me. A wave of disgust passed over me. What had come over my splendid brother? "Good night," I said, turning away. "Or morning." And with a short laugh, he went into the outer hall. I heard him strike a match, and then followed the rattle of the key and the clang of a falling lid. He had evidently thrown the key into the box and dropped the lid without any attempt to avoid noise. I went back to bed, and the affair being over and the mystery solved, fell into a broken sleep. I was awakened at the usual time by David, the under footman, with my hot water. 7:30, sir, he said. A fine morning when the mist clears. Thank you, David, I replied, and sat up. What was wrong? Of course, that affair last night, and Michael's fall from his pedestal. Well, there are spots on the sun, and no man is always himself. I dressed and went downstairs. In the dining room the fire was blazing merrily, and a delicious smell came from the sideboard, where covered silver dishes sat on platforms over spirit lamps. The huge room, with its long windows, its warm tinted Turkey carpet, its panelled walls and arched ceiling, was a picture of solid, settled comfort. Digby was wandering about with a plate of porridge in one hand and a busy spoon in the other. Augustus was at the sideboard, removing cover after cover, adding sausage to eggs and bacon. Good effort, Gus, said Digby, eyeing the piled mass. Shove some kedigree on top. Had it, said Augustus. This goes on top of the kedigree. Isabel was sitting in her place, and I went to see what I could get for her. As I stood by her chair, she put her hand up to mine and gave it a squeeze. I'll wait for Aunt Patricia, John, she said. At that moment the door opened and Claudia entered, following by Michael. She looked very white, and Michael was wooden and reserved. Michael foraged at the sideboard for Claudia, and then went for the coffee table. He took the coffee pot and milk jug from their tray, and held them poised, one in each hand, over the cup. His face was inscrutable, and his hands absolutely steady. But something was wrong. He looked up and saw me watching him. "Morning, Bunface," quoted he. "Sleep well?" "Except for one unpleasant dream, Beau." He returned to his place beside Claudia, and as he seated himself, Aunt Patricia entered the room. We rose and then stood petrified. One look at her face was sufficient. As she stopped halfway from the door, I knew what she was going to say. "I request that none of you, leave the house today," she said, "unless that is one of you cares to say, even now, a fool and a liar I am, but a criminal I am not." No one moved. "Very well," continued Lady Brandon. "I will have no mercy. The thief shall pay a thief's penalty, whoever it may be." She fixed us with her cold, angry gaze. "One other thing. The servants know nothing of this, and they are to know nothing. We will keep it to ourselves as long as possible. That one of you is a treacherous, lying thief." Michael spoke. "Say one of us four, please, Aunt Patricia." "Thank you, Michael," she replied cuttingly. "I will apply to you when I need your help in choosing my words." "I think you might say one of you three brothers," Augustus remarked. "Hold your miserable tongue," said Lady Brandon. Then, as I was saying, the servants are to know nothing, until of course the police have the story and the newspapers are adorned with the portrait of one of your faces. Once again her scornful glance swept us in turn. "Has none of you anything more to say?" None of us did. "Very well. No one leaves this house." And with that she went out, closing the door behind her. "You foul, filthy, utter cads," sputtered Augustus. "Cuts no ice, Gus," said Michael, in a perfectly friendly voice. "Run along and play." Then turning to the girls he said, "Do me a favor, Queen Claudia and faithful hound. Go with him, and put this wretched business out of your minds. You have my absolute assurance that it will be settled today." "How?" said Claudia. "Never mind how. Just believe and rest assured, before you go to bed tonight, everything will be as clear as crystal." "Or as blue as a sapphire," said Digby. "By Jove, I've got an idea, a theory. My dog Josh was alarmed at the sudden darkness, jumped on a chair, wagged his tail, knocked over the cover, reversed his engine, smelled round to see what had been done, found nothing, yawned in boredom, and inhaled the blue water. A very sound theory, said Michael, as Augustus and the two girls left the room. Sounder still if Josh had been there. Precisely, said Digby, as the door closed. So what I want to know is who did pinch the thing. Offensive fella, I consider. But Gussie being out of it, it must be one of us. Excuse my mentioning it, but me being out of it, it must be one of you two. Now, unless you really want the thing, I say put it back. Michael's face was expressionless. I'm thinking of bolting with it, he said. John going with his half too? No, replied Michael. I'm taking it all. Well, said Digby, looking at his watch, could you go soon after lunch? I want to run up to town. Until the matter is cleared up, Aunt seems to have other views. Do my best to oblige, said Michael. Aunt Patricia did not appear at lunch, nor did Claudia. It was a painful meal, to me at any rate, though Digby seemed happy and Michael unconcerned. Afterward I went up to my bedroom, tired after my wakeful night, and threw myself on my bed. I was awakened from a heavy sleep by the entrance of Digby a couple of hours later. He held a letter in his hand. Hi, Hogg, quoth he, wake up and listen. He sat himself down on the foot of the bed. What's up now? I yawned, rubbing my eyes. We've got to use our wits and do something to help Beau. He's done a bunk. Left this note with David. Says he's pinched the blue water and isn't going to face the police. What? I cried. Read it, said Digby, and passed the letter to me. My dear Dig, it ran, when David gives you this, I shall be well on my way to where I am going. Please tell Aunt there is no further need to chivvy any of you about the blue water. If a mystery merchant comes from Scotland Yard, tell him you know I was in sore straits. Or is it straits, or whatever, for money. But that this is my first offense, and I must have been led astray by bad companions, you and John. If I send you any address later, it will be in absolute confidence. I do hope that things will settle down quietly now. Sad, sad, sad. Give my love to Claudia. Ever thine, Michael. Impossible, I said. Of course it is, fathead, replied Digby. He's off on the romantic tack, taking the blame to shield his little brother. Which, I asked, you? No. Me? Subtle mathematics. But I didn't do it, I said. You don't think Beau seriously suppose you or I would steal from Aunt Patricia, of all people? Somebody has, haven't they? Said Digby. Anyway, you seriously suppose that Beau had. How do you know? By the way you looked at him. Oh, half a dozen times. I had reasons to suspect him. What reason? That you caught his wrist in the dark. Like you, he was probably only trying to catch Gussie in the act of putting it back. I'd rather not say any more about it. Don't be silly. The more we both know, the more we can help him. You needn't feel as though you were giving Beau away. I'm not asking you to tell Aunt or the police, am I? This was true enough. No harm could result from Digby's knowing all that I knew. Therefore I told him about how I had met Beau in the drawing-room last night with the key in his hand. And what were you doing, if one may ask? Interrupted my brother. Going to see if the blue water had been returned. Anyhow, Beau hadn't returned it, had he? Digby grinned. No, but at the time I naturally enough thought he had, said I. I suppose that fixed the idea in my mind. I first got the idea when I caught his hand hovering over the glass cover in the darkness. But now that you have pointed out, he was probably only doing what I was doing myself. Exactly, said Digby. Now, do you still suspect Beau? Absolutely not. Very good, then. Did you do it? I did not. Nor did I. A silence fell between us. I'm going dotty, said I at last. I've gone, said Digby, and we sat staring at each other for a long time. Dinner that night was an extraordinary meal, at which only Isabel, Claudia, Augustus, and I appeared. According to Burden, Lady Brandon was dining in her own room. Mr. Michael was not in his room when David took up hot water, and Mr. Digby had been seen going down to drive soon after tea. After dinner, I found myself alone in the drawing-room with Isabel. She asked me if I had taken the blue water, and of course I said I hadn't. She started to cry. "Don't cry," I said, ashamed of my inability to be articulate. "I'm crying for joy," she sobbed. "Now that you have told me you didn't do it. I know you didn't, of course. I never thought you did. Only it was you Michael caught against the table, and I saw you go down in the night. To put it back, I thought." "Saw me?" I asked in surprise. "I was awake and saw a light go by under my door. I came out and looked over the banister. I went to see if the wretched thing had come back," I said, "and it was I who caught Michael when the lights were out. We were both expecting to catch Gussie. Oh, I have been so wretchedly unhappy, but I'm so glad to know you didn't do it." "Might I speak to you, sir?" David interrupted. "You're doing it, David." "In private, sir, a moment." I went into the hall with him, and there he produced a note. "Mr. Digby, sir, instructed me to give you this in private." "Thank you, David." I went along to the smoking-room, opened the letter as I went. The smoking-room was empty, and the click of balls from the neighboring billiards-room told why. Gussie was at his favorite aimless employment. I turned up the lights, poked the fire, pulled up the deepest chair, filled my pipe, and lit it. Then I read poor Digby's letter. "My dear John, after terrific mental wrestling, which cost me a trouser button, I have come to the conclusion that I cannot let the innocent suffer for my guilt. By the time you get I shall be well on my way to where I am going. Tell Aunt I shall write to her from town. When you find yourself on the witness stand, tell the beak that you have always known me to be a weak but not vicious, and that my downfall was due to smoking cigarettes and going in for newspaper competitions. Also that you are sure I shall redeem myself by hard work, earn 30 shillings a week, and return the 30,000 pounds out of my savings. Write and let me know how things go on as soon as I send you an address, which you will of course keep to yourself. And don't forget, directly you hear from Beau, let him know that I have confessed and bolted, and that he can return to Brandon Abbas. Give my love to Isabel. Ever thine, Digby. It had never occurred to me that Digby would also flee. Did he think that Michael was guilty? Flee to divert suspicion and divide pursuit? No, more likely his idea was to help shield the person whom Michael thought he was shielding, obviously either Claudia or Isabel or me. Suddenly it dawned on me that it was also my affair to help prevent suspicion falling upon the two girls, that if my two brothers could wreck their lives in such a cause, then so could I. If I fled as well, the obvious solution for the detectives would be that the theft was the result of a collusion among the three rascally Geste brothers. But where should I go? Should I say anything to Isabel? One of these problems was subconsciously solved. From that moment that I had learned of Michael's flight, I had vague memories of how, as children, who had sat at a French officer's feet and said, "I shall join the French Foreign Legion when I leave Eton, get a commission, and go into his regiment." Digby and I had applauded the plan. Had Michael remembered this, and was he now on his way to win renown? It would be so like Michael and Digby. Had he had the same idea and followed him? It would be so like Digby and I. Should I follow my brother's lead, asking nothing better than to win their approval? We will continue this story next Friday or Saturday, and thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.